Hello. Get started. So ITS is the laboratory branch for the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. And the FCC and the NTIA manage US spectrum. And it's a complicated problem. And as we move into a wireless world, it gets more complicated. So we're developing tools and technologies to help cities plan for this. So let's suppose we're going through developing a new wireless application. How about we pick an interesting application like a mobile augmented reality application? Okay, so you could use this in the city for tourism, for navigation, or to even show people what a neighborhood could look like instead of what it does look like. So what are the requirements for this application going to be? What's the strain going to be on your infrastructure, both wired and wireless? And you have to think about this in the midst of the fact that with the emergence of the Internet of Things, the number of wireless devices is growing exponentially. So at ITS, we start with the end user experience. The bottom line is, what does the end user think about the experience? And we've got tools and technologies to determine what's the minimum bandwidth requirements, for example, to make this augmented reality app appealing to somebody so they'll actually come back and use it. And then look at your existing infrastructure. Is it sufficient to satisfy the requirements of this new application? And do you want to do a prototype implementation in a high bandwidth neighborhood? So we need to think deeper about requirements than just the raw bandwidth, because it really depends upon your demand. And as you crank up the demand dial, that's going to start straining your infrastructure in different ways. Do you have the wireless capacity and the wired capacity to handle this? As part of that, you need to think about challenging scenarios. The world is shifting to wireless. So you've got your application worried, and now everybody starts streaming video over the same frequencies that you're using. Is there enough room for that? So where do you get your spectrum from? There's really just two choices right now. You've got licensed spectrum that you could lease from a company, for example, or open, unlicensed spectrum. And each of these has pros and cons. So you need to do the trades on this. How do you decide what the cost of your installing your own infrastructure is versus the cost of licensing fees? How do you figure out the capacity versus cost equation? And then let's look at unlicensed. Okay, so what's the baseline capacity? What's your surge capability? Are you able to handle unexpected events? What's going to happen as more and more unlicensed devices come into this spectrum? And then you look at the licensed domain. It may already be congested. Is there enough headroom for an emergency? Or, for example, because it's down there, let's say we've made our choice. Okay, so we've had our eureka moment. We're going to go with one or the other. Now there's some other considerations you have to take up. So big one, of course, is security. If you're committing to a wireless system, you've opened up a new attack vector. And you've got to worry about what is your vulnerability to a bad actor potentially coming in, taking over some of your wireless circuits, and altering your entire application and hijacking it. So we've solved that. Now we've got a new wrench. Somebody decides this not only has to work outdoors, but indoors as well. Now we've got more challenges. For example, indoors presents unique propagation challenges in the spectrum. In fact, modern, high energy efficient buildings with low E glass have really poor propagation properties. So if you want this to work everywhere, now you've got to install infrastructure inside buildings as well, which is going to cause some problems. So let's say we've succeeded. Now we sit back, rest on our laurels. No. We've still got to monitor and take care of our spectrum just like we would any other resource. So for example, interference will occur. You need a spectrum monitoring system in place if you're concerned about this application being up all the time to locate and identify sources of interference, as well as to look for spots of spectral congestion so you know where to install more infrastructure. So now if you've got it all working, let's say it's super popular, it's spreading. Was this expected? Do you have the dollars to continue the build out of this? So just in conclusion, planning for spectrum is just like planning for any other resource. we're developing the tools and technologies to allow people to do this planning, but the technology is constantly changing. You've got to constantly be keeping up with it and looking at what these new challenges are going to be. So I think that's it. Thank you.